Joining us today is Jonathan Harper, Senior Atmospheric Scientist at SKM, who'll be speaking at IIR's Dust Management Strategies Conference, which takes place on the 7th to 8th of December 2010 in Brisbane. Hello John, thanks for joining us.
No worries, thanks for that, James.
First of all, what is the process for compiling and validating a dust model?
Well, there's a lot of things to take into consideration here, James. You have to choose what model is suitable for myself or my facility. So if you've got low-lying sources, close receptors, then you can use things like Ozplume. You can actually move into some of the more modern US EPA ones. We're talking air mod here. If you're talking a larger facility where you do have stacks involved as well, then you might have to move to CalPuff or TAPM if you're starting to look at sort of photochemistry as well. Also, other things to take into consideration is what are my emissions? Now, if you've got a nice stack, it's very easy to do some stack sampling. Right, that's my emission rate, here's my flow rate, plug the numbers in and away we go. But if you've got a very large, complex facility with a lot of fugitive sources, so you're a bulk handling, a mine site, those sorts of facilities, then you actually have to start looking at, can I use the MPI equations? Now, you have to remember the MPI equations are based off the US EPA AP42 type equations, which were really designed around USA coal mines. So what we're looking at there is it's dealing with coal and what overburden you find around coal mines. So it tends to be more your salt rocks, where your siltstones, your sandstones. So if you're looking at gold mines, you're looking at iron ore mines, nickel mines in areas outside of areas like the Hunter Valley, your NPI equations really aren't that suitable, so you actually have to start investigating other options. Now, one of the main options I actually recommend is on-site sampling. Advantage of on-site sampling is you can really get in there and have a look at what's causing the emissions. Is it just wind speed, or are you looking at specific materials with wind speed, the moisture content of that material, and even get down further into it and you start looking at particle size distribution within inside the material you're trying to determine. Once you've actually determined all that, then you can actually create an emission file, put that into the model, run the model, and compare your predicted results versus monitoring results. So the top one, of course, is you can't actually validate a model unless you've got monitoring results. So you really need a year's worth of monitoring, ambient monitoring, either with a high vol or a TOM or a BAM, before you can actually accomplish a full model validation.
And how can meteorology and modelling enable effective dust management?
There's three ways to really look at that. You can use the modelling using what we've just sort of talked about, especially if you've done on-site testing. And you can go through, and once you've built up the facility inside the model, what was turned on, what wasn't turned on, what product was running at the time, what was its moisture, what was the wind speed, what was the wind direction. And you can use that to say, right, we validated the model, we have a lot of confidence in our model, so let's break that model down and start looking at what was the individual contribution at that receptor. And you relate it back and say, okay, wind erosion from stockpiles was a big one. We've also found our vehicles are starting to pop up there. Vehicles themselves may not be a big emitter, but they can be a fairly constant emitter. So that sort of pops up. And you can start narrowing down the areas you need to concentrate. So instead of going through your facility and saying, we need to do X, Y, and Z, you can actually say, well, it's this transfer station, these stockpiles, and these roads are our biggest impactor. And that allows you to actually work out a very cost-effective solutions to what your dust problems are. So if it's wind erosion, you can go through and say, right, what do we need to do? Let's see how effective a wind fence is going to be. And you can look at how effective is a environmental berm, so it's got vegetation on it, sort of downwind. You can also look at chemical surfactants to put on the top of the stockpiles, and you can start working out what's the capex cost versus what's the opex cost versus how effective is it going to be. So the trick's really to find out what's a cost-effective solution. The second one, of course, is you've got a validated model. You can actually take real-time wind readings from meteorological stations, and you can actually model your plume in real time. So you can work out where your dust is going. And you can actually track that down and say, okay, it's starting to head towards the town or our sensitive receptors. We need to do something now. Now, it looks really good. You can end up with some really pretty pictures and some nice contour graphs moving in real time. But the only trouble is once it starts to highlight that there is going to be a problem, then it's too late to actually start reducing that problem. which leads us into the third one, is actually what we call proactive dust management. Now, proactive dust management is using a meteorological forecast inside the dust model to predict if your facility is going to have an impact tomorrow. And if your impact is going to be tomorrow, you can determine what time it is, and you can actually work out full dust management strategies today. So, right, high wind speeds tomorrow, we're going to impact the town. Let's get out there and cover these stockpiles in a chemical surfactant. If there's going to be a low wind speed aversion type vent, you can say, well, we know we're going to have trouble out of these transfer stations or the crusher plant. So let's make sure we've got some fogger units on standby and working, ready to be turned on first thing tomorrow morning when we get those adverse meteorological conditions.
And how can results be incorporated into a dust management strategy?
It's really a combination of all three of those. You need to know what are your biggest emitters, so you actually want to tackle your top 10 or 15 big sources, work out your cost-benefit strategy. From there, you actually want to work through, do we need to do re-engineering? Is it procedural change, or is there a management change? The dust is really coming from the boots of the conveyors. It's actually the skirting that's causing us the problem, not the chute itself. Let's try and make sure that we've got our skirts properly aligned. Could be belt wash stations, could be carry-back material on your conveyors. That's a way for a facility to determine what their impact is and where it's coming from. So part of their strategy would be hitting the top 15 sources on site and working out what their most cost-effective solution is. Followed on from that, I would actually recommend using a proactive management system. And the whole idea of that is determining what tomorrow's meteorology is, what your emissions are going to be, what your impact is going to be, and you can take action today to prevent any sort of issues tomorrow. It's probably the way of the future.
You're speaking at IIR's Dust Management Strategies 2010 conference, which takes place on the 7th to 8th of December in Brisbane. What will be the focus of your presentation?
Well, James, I'm actually going to talk about all three of those. I won't talk about too much in depth for compiling and validating a dust model, because I have spoken about that previously at your conferences. I will touch on it, just more of a reminder of how you should go about these things before we move into using meteorology and modelling for effective dust management. So tackling your big emitters or your big impactors, followed by how to use the model further. You've spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time developing this model. Let's use it to its full potential. So then I'll be talking about a lot about proactive dust management and what you should be using for that.
Jon Harper, many thanks for your time today.
No worries, thanks for that, James.